Okay, we're done with Indiana. I want to talk about college football because it is getting crazy once again. They are going to expand the college football playoff most likely in 2026. So let's be very clear. 2025 is going to stay intact. It's going to be the 12-team playoff. There's going to be the same auto bid structure, buys for conference champions, all of those things. The college football playoff is staying intact for 2025 most likely. 2026 will more than likely see expansion to 14 or 16 teams. Ross Dellinger has reported that that is imminent. Likely what this would include. Now, really sit down, really get yourself composed, and get your senses gathered for this one. Likely there's going to be 4 auto bids for the Big Ten and 4 auto bids for the SEC. That means that in the conference standings, probably it'll work that way. Maybe it'll work in terms of playoff rankings, but I imagine that it would mean in the conference standings, top 4 in the Big Ten go, top 4 in the SEC go, 2 from the ACC, 2 from the Big 12, the highest ranked G5 team, and Notre Dame, if they fit certain ranking requirements, would also go. That equals 14 teams. There's a potential that we could see 2 at-large teams get in as well at the 15 and 16. So this means a lot. First of all, I just dropped a lot of information on you. You can look on really anywhere that reports on college football and probably see that what I'm saying is true. But the SEC and Big Ten would effectively control the college football playoff because they would expand it to 14 and 16. They would have 4 auto bids from the Big Ten, 4 from the SEC, and then, of course, some auto bids from there. So that right away makes conference races more important, which is, if we're talking about, forget the 14 playoff, forget the BCS, forget the period of time before we even had a national championship game. If we're talking about the difference between the 12-team playoff that we currently have and the 14 or 16-team playoff that we could be expanding to, I think this is better because the regular season deserves importance in college football. And making these conference races as tight and interesting as possible would be very, very fun. I'll talk about what would have happened if we did this last season in a second. Also, we could see a world where conference championship weekend shifts from the top 2 teams to maybe teams 3 and 6 or 4 and 5, where we have play-in games, main event play-in games where the teams right on the bubble of qualifying for the playoff would play each other for a spot in the playoff. I would love to see those games at campus sites if they happen. That is way too hypothetical and way down the line, and don't want to spend too much time on that idea. But this would be fun because it simplifies the regular season, right? Part of the reason why we love the NFL is because the playoff scenarios in November and December are so much fun to watch play out. And you understand that if this team wins and this team loses, then this happens and it affects this team in the other conference because this tiebreaker, it's fun, it's interesting. That's then how it would work in college football, whereas right now you see the rankings and really nothing matters because if a team wins or loses, who knows how the committee would rank them, right? And we still have to sit around and wait for the committee to rank the teams, and it's very unclear what the criteria would be. There's so many more moving parts. It simplifies the regular season. It just says, you know what, if you're in the Big Ten, you have to finish in the top 4, and if you do, you go to the playoff. If you are in the SEC and you finish in the top 4, congratulations, you're going to the playoff. If you're a ACC or a Big 12 championship caliber team to play in that game, you go to the playoff right away. And potentially we have room for a couple more at-large teams to sort of collect the best of the rest, perhaps, in that situation. It would make conference races more important. That makes things simple. It emphasizes the regular season again, while probably not sacrificing the quality of the playoff most likely. And it allows for more regular season schedules because if you put us in a situation where the conference standings are all that matter, then your non-conference games kind of don't mean much. Yeah, they mean much to your ranking. They mean much to where you would be in the playoff in terms of seeding. But it doesn't necessarily mean very much in terms of actually qualifying for the playoff, which means that if you're Ohio State, why not schedule Bama? If you're Michigan, why not schedule, I was going to say Oregon, but they're in the Big Ten now. If you're Michigan, why not schedule a Georgia, right? Why not? Because it's a non-conference game. Doesn't really matter. You're going to the playoff anyway if you finish in the top 4, and that win or loss isn't going to impact that in any way. And the SEC would probably expand to 9 conference games. We'd have more teams with more conference games because it doesn't matter if you lose in conference. It doesn't matter if you lose. It just matters if you lose in conference. And if that's even, then it's even, right? If you have 9 SEC games, that's, 8 more losses, I guess it would be. But it doesn't matter. 8 more teams that would lose 1 extra game in the SEC rather than scheduling a cupcake win against North Dakota State, bad example, rather than Alcorn State maybe, a free win. You play another SEC team, you have an opportunity to lose, and you have better non-conference games, Big Ten versus SEC, ACC versus Big Ten, or whatever it may be. We could see some of that. Better regular season schedules, more teams in the playoff may or may not be a good thing, but what is nice is that conference races are what's most important. That's going to strengthen rivalries as well. Maybe Ohio State versus Michigan becomes a big deal because the winner of that game could, or the loser of that game could drop out of the top four, similar to how we talked about that when there was only 4 teams in the playoff at all. I want to talk about what happened if we did this last season. So again, this could happen in 2026. It feels like we'll definitely expand to 14 or 16. It also seems like we'll probably see auto bids for conferences. So the Big Ten, every year, 4 teams go. SEC, every year, 4 teams make it. ACC has 2. Big 12 has 2. G5 team, Notre Dame if they're ranked high enough, and then maybe 2 more at-large teams as well. If we did this last season, the Big Ten standings were the following. It was Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State. So those 4 teams would go. Texas would be there alongside Georgia, Tennessee, and Missouri. What's fun about the SEC is Missouri would be at the top of a large tie at 5-3 between Missouri, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Texas A&M, all tied at 5-3 in conference. Insane tiebreakers in the SEC. The top of the SEC would be an absolute dogfight and really a boat race where you're not just racing for 12 playoff spots, but you're racing for 4 conference playoff spots effectively. That's what we could see in the SEC. Moving forward, the Big Ten would have been fun as well. Illinois would have been the next team out. There was a more clear-cut top 4. SMU and Clemson would make the ACC, make it with the ACC. The Big 12 would send Arizona State and Iowa State. BYU would have been right there. And then Boise State would be the top G5 team. Notre Dame would have qualified, of course. And then if we had 2 at-large teams, it would have been Alabama and Miami according to the playoff rankings. That puts 16 teams in there. That puts pretty much every team you can argue deserves to be there. Ole Miss can't complain because there's 4 auto bids in the SEC. If you are capable of winning a national championship, you should be capable of being in the top 4 of the SEC. The teams that could complain about missing the playoff, Alabama and Miami, would have made it in, right? You kind of get everything you want in that situation. You get, whether it's 14 or 16, if it's 14, we could see the 2 teams with a bye, just like the NFL, be the Big Ten champion and the SEC champion automatically. I could see that because they control a lot of the gravity of what could happen because they have the most power as the biggest and most influential conferences. In my opinion, if we're going to do this, we should fully commit to it and completely have auto bids. If we're going to start introducing auto bids, I think we should just straight up have auto bids and no at-large. Because the at-large is what makes it complicated and it makes it subjective. Let's have a system every year where maybe we do it this way, where there's 4 Big Ten teams, 4 SEC teams, 2 from the ACC, 2 from the Big 12, 1 group of 5 team, Notre Dame, right? Or maybe we just have a column for independents. And then there's 2 more spots. In my opinion, is that the amount of auto bids should change year to year. So what I mean by that is whichever 2 conferences finished the best in the playoff in the previous year, add an auto bid. So those last 2 auto bids are filled by whoever made the championship from the last season. That doesn't mean the team carries over. It means the conference carries over. So who won the national championship? Ohio State, which means the Big Ten would get a 5th at-large spot or a 5th auto bid, right? So they would get that 5th team in the playoff, which would allow room for someone next season. Maybe it's Michigan, right? Or if the last season were to replicate, maybe it would be Illinois. And then the second one would be the next best conference. So this is where things get tricky because I think you would skip Notre Dame in this scenario because Notre Dame, of course, isn't in a conference, and adding another spot for an independent is kind of silly because there really isn't any other good independents. There's no reason to have 2 independent spots. But then the next, I suppose, who would it be? Who was in the semifinals? Penn State was in the semifinals, and Ohio State beat Texas. So the next one would be the SEC. So then there'd be a 5th SEC team. So that's probably how it would go year after year, is you'd end up with 5 Big Ten and 5 SEC, although I'm sure those 2 most powerful conferences wouldn't be complaining about that. I think that's an idea for how we could fill out a 16-team bracket if we were to go all the way there. I'm apprehensive about having buys in college football or any playoff system at all. I don't like buys. I really think they've hurt things. I think they're hurting the NFL, for example. But regardless, we're in a situation where the college football playoff's expanding once again. We're going to have auto bids. That's crazy. I think it could be fun. I think it could be better because I think it solidifies the importance of the regular season. It solidifies the importance rather of conference season in the regular season as well. And then it puts us in a situation where, again, if you're a team like IU, then you fully understand what you have to do to make the playoff, Right now, next year, it's kind of unclear. Could Purdue make it in at 10-2? I have no idea. But if there was a top 4 teams straight up, probably they could get in at 10-2. I say that because it's likely that Indiana will be favored at every game except for at Penn State and at Oregon. Do they have to win one of those games to make the playoff? Probably, honestly, next season. But it's nice if it's concrete, if it's simple. It makes the conference rivalries a bit more fierce, a bit more intense, a bit more important. They'd have a bit more emphasis, perhaps. I kind of like this idea. I'm going to be honest with you. It might be better than the system we have now. It also dilutes the impact of having a first-round bye and not quite knowing where those games would have to be. If we had 16, then every single team would have a home playoff. Every single top seed would have a home playoff game, which I think is fantastic. Oregon deserved one, right? Being the number 1 team in the country means that you should play a game at home, in my opinion. I don't think it's right that a team could be one of the best teams in the country, skip the first round. If you're good enough to skip the first round, then you shouldn't have to lose out on your home playoff game, right? And I understand the fact that they skip the first round and play in the bowl. I understand the concept that there's 6 New Year's Six bowls and 2 go to the semifinals, 4 go to the quarterfinals. But if you have 16 teams, then everyone can have a home playoff game that deserves one, and you have more teams with home playoff games, which is fun. And then you transition into a situation where you can play that out the rest of the bowls, and the playoffs have a more even playing field, I suppose, because teams don't have byes and awkward differences in rest and rest versus rust. That whole debate. This could be fun. The Big Ten and SEC would control it, and they'd probably then dominate college football for real for the rest of time. But the ACC would get teams in, and the Big 12 would get teams in. They're guaranteed to, so they've got to keep some recruits in state, right? And then you could be in situations where G5 teams and Notre Dame have an opportunity as well, a couple at-large groups. This might not be a bad idea. This idea of having 16 teams, maybe 14, I think if you're going to expand, you should just go straight to 16 and keep it there for a long time and keep the system for a long time. I think it could work. Obviously, there's some risks, there's some flaws, but it would keep everyone happy, and I think it would keep the fans happy too. It would make this playoff really interesting. It would make the regular season interesting again as well. I don't hate this for college football. I don't hate this for the Big Ten or the SEC or anyone really. This could be a win-win for everybody, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity of seeing that play out in the future. Again, this would be 2026 if it happens. We'll continue to update, but 2025 will stay the same, and after that, the doors are going to break wide open, and we're going to be in a big-time opportunity with a lot to talk about the college football playoff if this happens, and it certainly make IU football and even Purdue football a whole lot more interesting when it comes to the Big Ten conference race. College football playoff is going to continue to expand, and honestly, I'm a little bit excited about it.